Today on Traveller's Guide IELTS, we are looking at the IGCSE English as a Second Language speaking test. This is the new Pearson Edexcel IGCSE ESL, which will be examined for the first time in 2025. So it's a bit different from the previous version, but this is what we teach in my school. I have been a mock examiner for this test, so I'm quite familiar with how the test works. In this video, I'm going to explain the test and do some practice, give some examples. If you enjoy the video, if you find it useful, please press the thumbs up button, leave a comment with your opinions, and subscribe to Traveller's Guide IELTS for more videos like this. The IGCSE ESL speaking test includes 3 tasks. You get 10 minutes to prepare before the test begins, and then you will be speaking for around 15 minutes. Task 1 is a role play where you and the examiner both play different parts. Task 2 is a 2-minute speech about a study topic that you have already prepared in advance. And task 3 is describe a photo, and then there are follow-up questions related to the same topic. However, before these 3 tasks, there is a warm-up with some basic questions. These do not count towards your final score, but it is a good way to set a good example, to help you to relax, and give the examiner an idea of your ability. The test is recorded and sent away to be marked, so the examiner does not decide your final score. They have no influence at all. They're just there to ask the questions and record your speaking, and it will be sent away and assessed remotely. And this test is marked on 2 different criteria. There's communication and content, and there's linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Communication and content is about your ideas and if they're relative to the topic and how you express them, while linguistic knowledge and accuracy is more about vocabulary and grammar. We will see a little bit about those later on. The final score for the speaking test is out of 50 marks, and here's a rough idea of the number of marks you need to get for your specific grades. So for example, if you're looking for a grade 6, you'll need to get 30 to 34 marks out of 50. Remember though that the speaking is just one part of the ESL test. So you've also got writing, reading and listening, and your final grade will be a total based on the number of marks you get. So they don't take the 4 grades and do an average, they add up the individual marks. So this is just a rough estimate really. Right, let's have a look at some of the warm-up questions that you might be asked in the speaking test. Remember that these do not count towards your final score, so you don't need to worry about these at all. But yeah, as I said, it's a good way to get warmed up to help you feel more relaxed. So just trying to answer them and then move on. They might ask some basic things like, how are you today? What did you think of the weather today? What did you do before the test today? What are you going to do after the test? So how are you today? Very basic question. You should be able to answer that quite easily. You might even ask the examiner how they are as well. What do you think of the weather today? So a little bit more complicated, but still very basic. You can give your opinion there on this one, but also talk about what it's like. What did you do before the test today? This is really getting you thinking about past tense. So what happened in the past? And similarly, the last question, what are you going to do after the test, is now getting to think about the future tense. So in this little warm-up, you're now thinking about some vocabulary. You are just practicing some speaking to get that out of the way, and you're thinking about past and future tense in your verbs. So you should now be ready to go. Right, on to task 1 now, and this is the role play task. So a bit like cosplay, you are pretending to be someone and the examiner is pretending to be someone else. So you pretend to be in a situation having a conversation with the examiner, and the examiner pretends to be someone else. For example, the examiner might run a supermarket and you are pretending that you want a job in the supermarket. So it's like a job interview situation. You'll be given instructions and told which roles you'll be playing. That's just one example. You'll be asked 4 questions and you have to ask 1 question yourself. And you get up to 2 marks for each answer. It's still the same sort of marking criteria, so they're looking for pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, but most importantly in this part, it's answering the question with an answer that makes sense for the question. In the 10 minutes preparation time before the test begins, you have some time to see what the questions are likely to be and prepare some answers. Let's look at the card. First of all, my tip for this section is do not give 1-word answers. So if the question was, for example, how many people are going? Here's my example answer. Altogether, there will be 4 of us, my parents, my older sister, and me. Now, this is more than enough to get 2 points. I have highlighted the word 4 there because that is the key word in your answer. The question words are how many. So you must answer the question how many. If I just said my parents, my older sister, and me, that would answer the question who is going, but it doesn't strictly answer the question how many. So make sure we definitely answer the question. So my advice would be answer the question, but put it in a sentence. It is possible to get 2 out of 2 with a 1-word answer, but much better to give a whole sentence just to be sure. Right, this is an example of the student card. So this might be what you are given to prepare in your 10 minutes before the test. You will notice that there are 5 points, but it doesn't tell you the whole questions. However, it gives you an idea of the sort of things that are going to be asked. So you are speaking to a travel agent, you want to book a holiday. Right, this tells you your role in the role play. So the student is speaking to a travel agent. The examiner is going to be playing the part of the travel agent. So pretend that you want to go on holiday. A travel agent is a person who sells holidays. It's also the name of the shop where you can go to buy the holiday. I know nowadays most people tend to do it themselves, booking it online. But travel agents still exist. You can walk in, they will show you pictures, they will recommend things to you, and sell you the whole package: flights, hotels, excursions, tickets to events, everything all together. So you're speaking to a travel agent, you want to book a holiday. Now, the first 4 of these things are questions that you will be asked. So the examiner, first of all, number 1, will ask a question about travel and where to. So we know the topic's about traveling. Where is going to be the question word. So you might not know the question, but it's going to ask you where, and it's going to ask you about traveling. You can probably guess what the question is going to be. Something about where do you want to travel to. So for this, remember, it's just a role play. You can make it up. So just think of anywhere you'd like to go. Choose somewhere that you know something about. Try not to choose your actual hometown or the place where you are currently in taking the test. Even though it's a role play, think about going somewhere abroad. So you might, for example, say, would like to go to Paris. perhaps. Right, the next question, number 2, there is about people and how many. We did see this one in my example in the previous slide. Something about how many people are going. How many there is the question phrase, so we have to answer with a number, but ideally put that into a sentence. Number 3, there is just an exclamation mark. There are no words there. That's because this is an unseen question, and it's like a surprise question, if you like. You will not know what this question is about. It's just going to be still about the same topic. You're still the same roles, but they don't give you any clues what this one is about. We will see later, and when we see the examiner's card, what the question is in this case. But this means you cannot prepare an answer to this question. So it might be a bit more difficult, this one. Number 4 is going to be a question about stay and how long. So again, make sure you answer a length of time here, how long and stay. Then number 5 starts with a question mark. Then it has the words recommend and things to do there. This is where you have to ask a question to the examiner, who is the travel agent, and you should include the words recommend and things to do there. The examiner will say, do you have a question for me? Now, if you were to say, no, I don't have a question, you might get a mark for that because you have answered the question that the examiner has asked, but then you might not because you haven't asked a question. You really need to ask a question. If you were to ask a question about the topic, for example, how much will the tickets cost? You know, that's a reasonable question, but it doesn't include recommend and things to do there, which your student card says. So you might get 1 point for that as well, because you've asked a question, but it's not what you've been instructed to ask about. You need to ask a question about recommend and things to do there, and then you get 2 points for asking the question. And it doesn't matter what the examiner's answer is, but they will play along and they'll answer your question as if they are the travel agent. Now let's look at the examiner's card. So this is what the examiner will be looking at while you are looking at the student card. So the examiner's card would say, you are a travel agent, you are talking to a customer, ask questions 1 to 5 below in order, you begin. So the first one says, hello, where do you want to travel to? So we pretty much guessed that when we saw the student card. And the second one, how many people are going? Yep, we knew that was going to be the question. Question 3, however, says, what kind of accommodation are you looking for? Now, this might be a bit difficult because you might not know the word accommodation. That means where you will stay. And it says kind of accommodation. So, for example, do you want to stay in an apartment, a hotel, bed and breakfast maybe? Or you might be wanting to stay in a caravan. You need to give a kind of accommodation as your answer. Then question 4, how long do you want to stay? Again, we could have guessed that from the student card. And then the 5th one just says, do you have a question for me? And this is where you have to ask your question. Here is an example of how the conversation might go. So, examiner, hello, where do you want to travel to? Student, I'd like to go to Paris, please. Examiner, how many people are going? Student, altogether there will be 4 of us. Examiner, what kind of accommodation are you looking for? Student, we'd like to stay in a luxury hotel. Examiner, how long do you want to stay? Student, we'd like to stay for 5 nights. Examiner, do you have any questions for me? Student, I'm not sure what things we should do there. What would you recommend? Examiner, you should visit the art museum. They're very good. Okay, so here I have answered all of the questions. I've got a keyword in my answer, but I've put it within a whole sentence. So in the first one, Paris, second one, 4, third one, hotel, fourth one, 5 nights, and then there's my question using recommend and things to do. So for this, I would expect this type of conversation to get you 10 out of 10. 2 points for each answer. Obviously, it depends on your fluency and pronunciation, but they don't have to be perfect for you to get 2 points on each question. So I would expect this conversation to score 10 out of 10. So task 1, you can pick up some points there fairly easily just by giving a nice answer to the questions that answers the question and shows your English ability. We're now going to move on to task 2, and this is the topic talk. So you can choose which topic to prepare a 2-minute speech about, and you prepare it well in advance. So you've already prepared it before the day of the test. There are 3 different topics that you can choose from. There's the environment, the media, and equality. And in the textbook, there are modules on each of these topics, broken down into subtopics as well. So you can choose what aspect to talk about. So when it says the environment, don't try to talk about everything about the environment. Choose one specific issue to focus on. Now you prepare your speech before the day of the test. So for example, in the class, you can prepare your speech. You can practice it beforehand. You can use technology to help you. You can write 1 page of notes, but not full sentences. So instead you want bullet points. Put in vocabulary that you want to include. Make sure it's things that you know how to pronounce and how to use properly though. When it says 1 page of notes, that's 1 side of an A4 piece of paper, and you can either write them by hand or you can do it on a computer and print it out. Although it does say if you use a computer, the font size must be 12 or above. So you can't have a page with lots of tiny little writing on there. Now, at the start of the test, when you go into the exam room, you will give your notes to the examiner. But when it comes to task 2, the examiner will hand you your notes back so you can look at them while you are speaking. Now the examiner will check that your notes are not just the entire speech written out and you're just going to be reading it. They will also check that the notes are 1 side of paper and the right size if it's printed. So make sure that you're following all of those rules. Otherwise, the examiner might not give you the paper back and you'll just have to freestyle it. Anyway, the task 2 is a 2-minute speech followed by 3 minutes of related questions which you don't know in advance. However, they'll be on the same topic. So if you know a lot about the environment, choose to do a speech about the environment because then the questions are going to be better for you. Whereas if equality is something that you've enjoyed studying, you care a lot about, and you know a lot of vocabulary in that topic, do your speech about that because all the questions will be about equality and then you'll be able to talk about them. You get up to 20 marks for this part. Notice though that the marks are based on the speech and your answers to the questions together, not just the speech. This is why it's important to choose a topic that you are happy answering questions about. Like your speech is 2 minutes, the questions are 3 minutes. So they'll probably spend more time answering questions than you will in your actual speech. So make sure you choose the best topic for you. You get up to 12 marks for communication and content and up to 8 marks for linguistic knowledge and accuracy. So the 12 marks there for your ideas and how you explain them. up to 8 marks for your vocabulary and grammar. Right, and if we have a look at the descriptors for communication and content, to get the top band, so the examiners will listen to, well, the moderators or the person who's giving you the mark will listen to your recording, and then they'll decide which band you go in, and then they'll decide if you're top, middle, or bottom of that band. So that's where they get your mark from. If you want to be in the top band, which can get you 10, 11, or 12 marks, you need to communicate detailed information relevant to the topic and questions and consistently extended sequences of speech. So your ideas must be related to your topic, and you must be able to communicate them clearly, going into detail. So lots of extra information there. You also have to keep talking for a long time without stopping and thinking too much. Don't speak too quickly either. That's not going to help your communication. But if you're stopping, thinking, umming and ahhing, not sure, that's going to impact this part. It also says, speaks and responds with ease to questions spontaneously, resulting in natural interaction. So when the examiner asks you a question, don't think for too long before you answer. You should be able to answer quite quickly in a natural way, like you're having a conversation with someone that you know. I know it's easy to get nervous in an exam, but if you can relax and just pretend you're speaking to a friend, that will really help. Then it says communication is clear with occasional ambiguity. Pronunciation and intonation are consistently accurate and intelligible. So the first part there, communication is clear. That means the examiner can understand what you are talking about. It gets the meaning of everything. But it does say with occasional ambiguity. So that means you don't have to be perfect to get into the top band. Occasional ambiguity means sometimes the examiner doesn't know what you mean. As long as they know most of the time, you can get into the top band. Pronunciation and intonation are consistently accurate and intelligible. That means that the examiner knows which words you are saying. So there are two levels to this, you see. The examiner could understand every word you say, but not understand your overall meaning if you are using the words incorrectly or in the wrong order. But your pronunciation at the individual word level counts here. Right, and then on to the other side, linguistic knowledge and accuracy. To get the top band, which is 7 or 8 marks, you need to show a wide range of vocabulary that is consistently appropriate to the task. So if you start using vocabulary that you know from your economics A level, for example, but it's not actually about the topic you're on, then it's not appropriate vocabulary, even though it is high level. So it has to be high level, but it also has to be related to the topic. Then, wide range of straightforward and complex structures that are used effectively and appropriately with a few lapses. Right, a few lapses means small mistakes. So again, you can make mistakes in your grammar and vocabulary and still get into the top band. You do not have to be perfect to get full marks. If you listen to native speakers, they make mistakes occasionally. They might misspeak or use the wrong word or go back and correct something or change their mind halfway through a sentence. This is very natural, so you don't have to be like a robot, absolutely perfect all the time. But when it says straightforward and complex structures, that's using a mixture of short, simple sentences and longer, complex sentences, using them together effectively and appropriately. And then finally, consistently accurate vocabulary and structures, occasional minor errors. Again, it means you can make some mistakes, but most of the time your use of words and grammar is accurate. Right, going into a bit more detail about these topics. So it is important that you choose well in advance what topic you're going to do and prepare your speech. Don't forget to focus on the questions as well. You don't know what they're going to be, so read up on the subject, get some knowledge and vocabulary related to your topic, even if it's not part of your speech, so that you can be prepared for the questions. But if you choose the environment, for example, focus on one specific issue to talk about. For example, deforestation, cutting down trees. Maybe it's about climate change. You might think about your home country or where you are currently, how it's affected by climate change, or think about as a global issue. Maybe renewable energy, how things have changed over recent years and what it might be like in the future. It might be something about single-use plastics, recycling, ocean pollution, something like that. The second topic is the media. So you might talk about media bias. That's when reporters show favoritism towards one point of view rather than the other. Maybe it's the impact of media on our daily lives. So when it says media, it refers to news, TV, social media, all of this. It might have a positive impact, might have a negative impact. You might want to talk about the advantages and disadvantages and then give a conclusion overall. And it also says here, do we still need newspapers? Which is interesting. Recently they've become more digital, but some people still prefer to actually have a physical newspaper in their hands. Other people just get their news from social media. Is that always reliable? This could be the kind of thing that you talk about. And then the third option is equality. Now, you might talk about gender equality in sport, pay gap, for example. Generally speaking, men's sport, the players get paid a lot more than women's sport, but they're doing the same job. Is that fair? Equality in the workplace. And why is equality important? You might choose to focus on race or religion or age discrimination, perhaps, as well as gender. Maybe even equality on people who have English as a first language compared with people who have English as a second language. Does that mean they can't do the job as well? Not necessarily. So should they be judged based on their first language? This is a kind of topic that you might feel very strongly about, although the questions for this part might be a bit tougher. However, those are the three options: environment, media, equality. Choose the one that you know most about and you can do best in. Now if we move on to task 3 of the speaking test. This one is about 5 minutes. It's the final part. You're given a picture, and in the 10 minutes before the exam, you can prepare your response to describing the picture. So the first thing that you will do is describe what you can see in the picture. So in the 10 minutes before the test begins, you can prepare things for task 1 and task 3. So you can prepare some answers and work out what the questions are going to be for the role play, and you can also prepare your description of the picture, but you won't see the questions that come afterwards. However, they'll be related to the same topic. Here's an example from the IGCSE ESL textbook. You can see there's a picture there and some questions beside it. It will always start with describe the picture, or the examiner will say something like, can you start by describing the picture? So here are some tips on describing a picture. First of all, use ing verbs to describe the picture. So say what they are doing. For example, they're sitting, they are drinking, they are looking, things like that. Use ing verbs, are doing. Also, this is something I've noticed a lot of people do. They will say something as a fact, but they don't know. But you can guess. So don't say something is, say it might be. For example, they might be watching the sunrise, because they could be watching the sunset. It's not clear what time of day this is. So don't say, for example, they're drinking coffee. We can see they've got mugs in their hands, which would suggest it's a hot drink, and there's a stove set up beside them. But we don't know what's in those cups. Say they might be drinking coffee. It could be tea, it could be hot chocolate, it could be soup. Who knows? When you're describing the picture, you can talk about where things are in the picture. For example, top, bottom, left and right, or in the center or in the middle. Notice how we describe the corners. For example, we'd say the top right or top right hand corner. Don't say the right top. I know in some languages they would be the other way around, but in English we'd say top right. Things that are close to the camera we would call the foreground. Things that are far away from the camera we would call the background. So for example, the car, the tent, these are in the foreground. The mountains are in the background. When you're preparing your speech, writing notes to talk about, imagine you are there and think about what you could see, smell, hear, touch and taste if you were there. Describe the colours, what you can see, the materials things are made of, and what things might be used for. Think about the time of day or the time of year and describe the weather. So for example, in this picture we can see it's clear and dry. The sky is not cloudy at all. What time of year do we think it is? Perhaps it's late summer, judging by the dried grass that we can see in the foreground. Again, I don't know, that's why I'm saying perhaps. It might be. We can make a guess, but don't say it as a fact if you're not sure. And time of day could be morning, could be evening. Here's an example of how I might begin. Now, if you don't know how to start describing a picture, use the phrase, in this picture I can see. It's quite basic, and there are other ways to start, but if you don't know how else to start, that's a good way to get you on the right track. So, for example, in this picture, I can see two people enjoying a camping trip. A woman is sitting in a tent, while a man is sitting on a chair. Both of them have hot drinks in their hands, and they are looking towards the mountains in the background. I think it is probably early in the morning, and perhaps they are watching the sunrise. In the right-hand side of the picture, we can see the back of a car, and so on. And then again, just describe what you can see and what you think might be going on there. So then back to the questions that the examiner is going to ask. Again, you don't get to see these before the test, but these are the kind of things that you will be asked. So, is this somewhere you would like to visit? Why or why not? Maybe you hate camping trips, but perhaps you like peace and quiet of the mountainside, and you like to see the scenery and the views from up high. There is a car there, so obviously you can drive there. You don't have to walk up the mountain, so perhaps that would change your opinion. Maybe you can think of an example of a place near where you live that looks a bit like this place that you've been to. Number 2, where did you go on your last holiday? What did you do? What did you enjoy most? Now here, when it says the word holiday, it means trip. So where did you go? Don't talk about a school holiday when you just went home and did nothing. That's not what it means. And don't talk about coming to the place that you are currently. However, there might be somewhere nearby that you went on holiday. Perhaps you went to London for a few days when your parents were over visiting. Or perhaps you went on a family holiday last summer to a place in your home country. That's okay, but don't talk about your own home. Then number 3, if you could choose, where would you go for your next holiday and what would you do there? So here you can choose anywhere. It might be somewhere you've been before. You don't have to always say that you've been there before. It might be somewhere you've seen on TV, maybe a place where a film has been set that you've enjoyed. And then think about what there is to do. So don't choose somewhere that you don't know anything about. But again, it doesn't need to be actually where you would go. Just talk about something that you know about. Number 4, what advice would you give to someone visiting your country for the first time? Now, when questions include the phrase your country, I would always recommend saying the name of your country in your answer. The examiner might not know where you come from, and certainly the person listening to the test doesn't know you, so they won't know where you're from. Advice is giving someone useful help. So for example, something that they should do, something they should try, something they need to be aware of. Whether it's something like sorting out the money you need to take with you or the type of clothes that you would recommend that they wear. This is the sort of advice that you should tell them. And the second part of question 4, how would you prepare to travel to another country for the first time? So what would you do? You sort out your passport, you might buy some new clothes, pack your suitcase. Of course, you need to buy your tickets, arrange your accommodation, maybe learn some of the language, some basic phrases. These are the kind of things you can talk about. You have to think of ideas quite quickly and explain them, and also do it using good English. So there's a lot to think about here at the same time for a question you haven't seen. Then, if there is time, the examiner might ask you to think of a question based on this topic. And it gives you an example here, the cost of foreign travel. So at this point, remember, the examiner is no longer playing the role of the travel agent, and you are no longer a customer, you are you now. So you might ask something like, does it cost a lot to fly nowadays? Something like that. Here we have another example of the picture you might be given. This time it says the topic is accommodation. So again, that's places to stay. It's still related to the overall topic of travel and tourism, but now focusing specifically on accommodation. So in the picture, what can you see? There are 2 people there. They have suitcases beside them, which they are wheeling along the ground. They're wearing casual clothes. They're dressed for perhaps autumn or springtime. It looks like they might be leaving a hotel or just entered a hotel. I'm not sure if they're inside or outside. There's a lot of plants there, but they could be indoors. It could be outside. Not sure about that. So perhaps they're checking into a hotel. The man has earphones around his neck, or headphones. So he's been listening to music. They both look very happy. They're smiling at each other. So it looks like they're starting a holiday together. The questions for this topic, number 2 here, says, what kinds of accommodation do people typically use on holiday? So here we're looking for examples, like we mentioned earlier. Apartment, hotel, bed and breakfast, tent, caravan, all these kinds of things. What do you think is the best type of accommodation to stay in, and why? So now it's asking for your opinion. What is your favourite place to stay in? For example, your family might always choose an apartment because it gives you more space and each person can have their own room, and you like to have a kitchen so that you can do your own cooking. Other people might choose the cheapest possible accommodation because it's just somewhere to sleep and you want to have more money to enjoy the local sights and nightlife. So make sure you're answering all the question, your opinion, best type of accommodation, and why. Number 3, some people prefer to stay at the beach while others prefer the mountains or city centre. What is your opinion and why? So we've got 3 options here: beach, mountains, city centre. Which of these would you rather stay in? Obviously they all have their own advantages and disadvantages, which you could discuss, or you might just focus on the advantages of the one that you have chosen, because this could get quite a long answer otherwise. But choose the one you prefer and say why. Number 4, do you think holiday accommodation should be cheaper so that more people can afford it? Okay, so first we need to think about holiday accommodation. And some accommodation is cheap, for example camping, whereas hotels in city centres tend to be very expensive. For example, you go to London, hotels there are so expensive, and you don't get much for your money, just a tiny little room. When I was in Hong Kong, the rooms were so small and very expensive. So that will put some people off going there. So advantages and disadvantages of this. If the rooms are cheaper, it means that more people will come to that city, spend more money, be good for the local economy. However, disadvantages, you might say that if people are paying less money, then the hotels won't invest as much into the upkeep of the hotels. They may become in a state of disrepair, like untidy, that kind of thing. And then again, you have to ask a question on this topic. It suggests the usefulness of online reviews. So your question might be to the examiner. You might say, when you book a hotel, do you always read the reviews online first? Or do you think that they are not important? Just something like that. Then the examiner will give their opinion. And you don't need to take that conversation any further. Just need to ask a sensible, related question, showing that you can form a question and using some good vocabulary and related to the topic. Right, at this point, that will be the end of the test. So the examiner will then say, thank you, that's the end of the test. They'll stop the recording. That will then be uploaded and sent off to be marked. So I hope you have found this video useful. Thank you for watching. Good luck with your studies. I hope the actual test, when it comes along, goes well. You get questions that you like, and the topic is one that you are familiar with for your Part 2 speech. Please like the video if you found it useful. Subscribe to the channel for more English as a second language videos, and leave a comment down below if you want to. Thanks again, and goodbye for now.